The research vessel Quiet Dawn drifted through the darkness of space toward a frozen moon that had no name. Commander Lena stood at the observation window and watched the white surface grow larger as they approached. She had been in space for 15 years and had seen many strange things, but something about this moon made her feel uneasy in a way she could not explain. Dr. Ka clicked his mandibles together in excitement. The scientist had 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the light of distant stars. He had spent his entire career studying ancient civilizations, and the readings from this moon promised something extraordinary. The scanners had detected structures beneath the ice that were older than any human records in the Coalition database. This should have been impossible because humans were supposed to have developed space travel only 800 years ago. The landing team descended through the thin atmosphere and touched down on a plain of blue ice. Lena led the way with 6 soldiers behind her and Dr. Ka following with his equipment. The entrance to the underground facility was hidden beneath a ridge of frozen rock. It took them 3 hours to cut through the ice and reach the metal doors beneath. The doors opened easily when Lena placed her hand on the control panel. This surprised everyone because the facility had been buried for thousands of years. The lights inside flickered on as they entered, revealing a long corridor that stretched deep into the moon. The walls were covered with symbols that looked like warnings, but no one could read the ancient text. Dr. Ka recorded everything with trembling hands. The technology here was far beyond anything the Galactic Coalition possessed. The Coalition was an alliance of 12 spacefaring species that had maintained peace for over 2,000 years. Humanity had joined 6 centuries ago as a minor member, their population small and their damaged by climate disasters. Modern humans were known for being quiet and cooperative, never causing trouble, never standing out among the more powerful species. But this facility told a different story. This facility suggested that humans had once been something else entirely. They found him at the center of the complex. A single pod stood in a chamber surrounded by machines that hummed with power despite their age. Inside the pod was a man. He appeared to be in his early 30s with short brown hair and a face that looked peaceful in sleep. He wore a uniform that no one recognized, marked with symbols that matched the warnings on the walls. Dr. Ka immediately began scanning the pod. His compound eyes widened as he read the results. The man inside was alive. His vital signs were stable. He had been sleeping in this frozen state for approximately 1,758 years. Lena felt the unease in her stomach grow stronger. She looked at the warning symbols on the walls and then at the sleeping man. Something told her they should leave him alone. Something told her that waking him would change everything. But Dr. Ka was already activating the revival sequence. He argued that this discovery was too important to ignore. The Coalition Science Council would want to study this man and learn how humans had built such advanced technology so long ago. Lena tried to object, but she was overruled by the scientists' authority on archaeological matters. The pod hissed as it began the warming process. Frost melted from the glass surface. The machines around them increased their humming as power flowed through ancient circuits. Lena ordered her soldiers to raise their weapons, just in case. The man's eyes opened. They were gray like storm clouds, and they held a depth of experience that seemed impossible for someone who looked so young. He blinked once, twice, and then focused on the faces staring down at him. He did not seem afraid or confused. He seemed like someone waking from a short nap rather than a sleep that had lasted almost 2. He spoke in an old form of English that Lena could barely understand. His first words were a question that made no sense to anyone in the room. He asked if they had one. Lena helped him sit up and explained where he was and who they were. She told him about the Galactic Coalition and about how humanity had joined the community of spacefaring species. She told him the current year and watched his face carefully for a reaction. The man was silent for a long moment. Then he said his name was Daniel Cole, and he asked about something called Project Guardian. No one had ever heard of it. Dr. Ka ran medical scans on Daniel while he sat on the edge of the pod. The results made the scientist's mandibles click rapidly in disbelief. Daniel's cellular structure was reinforced at the molecular level in ways that should have been impossible. His bones were denser than any human on record. His muscles contained fibers that did not exist in normal biology. His neural activity exceeded anything ever measured in any known species. Daniel Cole was not a normal human. He was something that had been built. Lena asked him what he was. Daniel looked at her with those gray eyes and said that he was a guardian. He said it like the word should mean something, like it should inspire either hope or fear. But to Lena and everyone else in the room, it meant nothing at all. Daniel asked to see the facility's archives. He said there were things he needed to know, things that would tell him whether his sacrifice had meant anything. Lena saw no reason to refuse. She led him to a control room deeper in the complex where ancient screens flickered with data that no one could read. Daniel placed his hand on a wall panel and closed his eyes. The screens suddenly came alive with information, but that was not the only thing that happened. The entire moon began to shake. Lena grabbed a console to steady herself as the floor trembled beneath her feet. Alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Dr. Ka's equipment detected massive power signatures coming online deep underground, systems that had been dormant for almost 2,000 years waking up all at once. Daniel opened his eyes and looked at the data streaming across the screens. His face showed no surprise, only grim recognition. He said that this facility was not just an archive. It was a weapons platform. It was a fortress built to fight an enemy that had nearly destroyed everything. Lena demanded to know what enemy he was talking about. Daniel turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes that looked like fear. He said that if the facility was activating on its own, then the proximity sensors had detected something. He said that they needed to contact the coalition immediately. Because if he was right, then the war he had fought so long ago was not over. It was only beginning again. The facility extended deep into the heart of the frozen moon, far larger than anyone had imagined. Daniel led them through corridors that seemed to recognize his presence. Doors opened before he reached them. Lights activated as he approached. The ancient machines responded to him like loyal servants greeting a master who had been away for too long. Lena walked beside him and tried to understand what she was seeing. The technology here could revolutionize everything the Coalition knew about science and engineering. The weapon systems alone were centuries ahead of anything the most advanced species possessed, and all of it had been built by humans at a time when humanity was supposedly still struggling to leave their own solar system. Daniel stopped at a window that overlooked a massive underground hangar. Inside were ships unlike anything Lena had ever seen. They were sleek and dark and covered with the same warning symbols that marked the walls throughout the facility. Daniel stared at them for a long moment before speaking. He told Lena about his past in fragments, like someone trying to remember a dream that was fading. In his time, humanity had faced an enemy from beyond the galaxy. They called themselves nothing, had no name that human minds could comprehend, so humanity gave them one: the Hollow. They came from the void between galaxies, and they consumed everything in their path. Entire civilizations vanished before anyone understood the threat. Earth created the Guardian program as a last desperate measure. They took human children and rebuilt them from the genetic level, transforming them into living weapons capable of fighting an enemy that conventional forces could not stop. Daniel had been one of those children. He was taken from his family at age 3 and remembered nothing of his life before the program. He knew only war. He knew only fighting. The final battle had cost everything. The Guardians fought the Hollow in a conflict that spanned star systems and lasted for years. Daniel did not know the exact details of how it ended. He only knew that he had been placed in sleep with instructions to wait. He was the backup plan, the last Guardian, frozen in case the enemy ever returned. Lena listened in silence. She found it hard to believe that humanity had once possessed such power and such desperation. Modern humans were peaceful and unambitious, content to live quietly among the greater species of the Coalition. But Daniel spoke of a humanity that had stared into the abyss and refused to surrender. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Admiral. The military leader had brought a fleet of Coalition warships to investigate the facility and secure it for the Council. Was tall and covered in green scales, with yellow eyes that showed no warmth or trust. He viewed Daniel as a potential threat and demanded that the ancient human submit to detention and study. Daniel refused politely. He said that he meant no harm to the Coalition and only wanted to understand what had happened while he slept. He said that there were more important matters to discuss than his status as a curiosity for scientists to examine. Did not accept this answer. He ordered his soldiers to restrain Daniel and bring him to the flagship for transport to a Coalition detention facility. 12 armed moved forward with weapons drawn. What happened next lasted less than 3 seconds. Daniel moved faster than the eye could follow. He flowed between the soldiers like water through stones, his hands finding weapons and removing them with precise efficiency. He did not strike anyone hard enough to cause injury. He simply disarmed them all and left them standing in confusion, looking at their empty hands and wondering what had just happened. Lena had never seen anything move that fast. They were known as one of the most formidable warrior species in the Coalition. Their soldiers trained from childhood and were feared throughout the galaxy. Daniel had defeated 12 of them without breaking a sweat or causing a single bruise. Stared at Daniel with new eyes. The Admiral was not afraid, but he was clearly reassessing the situation. He asked what Daniel was, and Daniel gave the same answer he had given Lena. He was a guardian. He was built for war. Dr. Ka had been exploring the facility's database while this confrontation occurred. The scientist found records that made his compound eyes widen in amazement. The technology stored here could change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. It could build weapons capable of destroying planets or defenses that could make any world invulnerable. Several Coalition species would kill to possess such knowledge. Word of the discovery spread quickly. Within days, representatives from multiple species arrived to make claims on the facility. They argued that military technology should be controlled by the Coalition's defense forces. They insisted that it belonged in research institutions for careful study. The humans quietly suggested that it was their heritage and should return to their control. Old tensions that had been buried for centuries began to surface. But Daniel cared nothing for their political arguments. He spent his time studying the facility's long-range sensors, searching for something that no one else could see. Lena found him in the control room late one night, staring at a screen filled with data that meant nothing to her. He told her that he had found what he feared. Deep in the facility's detection network, buried among centuries of background noise, was a signal. It was faint and distant, coming from the far edge of explored space, but Daniel recognized the frequency immediately. It was a hollow beacon. Lena felt cold despite the warmth of the room. She asked Daniel what this meant, hoping he would tell her it was nothing, that the signal was old or meaningless. But his gray eyes held no comfort. He explained that he had been frozen for a reason. The war had not truly ended. The Hollow had been driven back but not destroyed. The Guardian program knew they would return eventually, so they preserved their last soldier to face them when that day came. The beacon meant the waiting was over. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, the enemy was stirring. The Hollow were coming back, and the galaxy that had forgotten their existence was about to remember why humanity had once been so desperate. Daniel turned back to the screen and began calculating trajectories and timelines. Lena stood beside him and tried to comprehend the scale of what he was describing. The Coalition had never faced a true existential threat. They had known only peace and prosperity for 2,000 years. That peace was about to end. Daniel stood before the Coalition Council on the capital world of Prime and told them about the end of everything. The council chamber was vast and filled with representatives from all 12 member species. High Counselor presided over the assembly, her energy-based form shifting through colors that reflected her emotional state. She had lived for over 300 years and had never seen anything truly threaten the peace she had helped maintain. Daniel presented the evidence he had gathered from the facility's sensors. He showed them the beacon signal and explained what the Hollow were and what they had done to countless civilizations before humanity stopped them. He spoke in simple terms because he knew most species had never heard of this enemy. The records had been lost or buried. The threat had faded into myth and then into nothing at all. The council listened politely and then dismissed his warnings. The representative argued that Daniel was exaggerating to make himself important. The delegation suggested that the signal could have natural explanations. Several other species simply did not believe that an enemy so powerful could have been forgotten by history. They thought Daniel was either lying or suffering from mental damage caused by his long sleep. Only a few humans in the chamber showed concern. They exchanged glances and whispered among themselves, but their voices held no weight in the council. Humanity was a minor species with little influence. Their warnings would be ignored just as easily as Daniel's. The political situation grew worse as days passed. The discovery of the Guardian facility had awakened old ambitions and old fears. They demanded that all advanced technology be placed under military control for the safety of the Coalition. They countered that knowledge should be free for all species to study and develop. The species known for their trading networks began making secret deals to acquire samples of the technology for their own purposes. Daniel watched these arguments with growing frustration. He had been frozen for almost 2,000 years, waiting to fight an enemy that could destroy everything. Instead, he found himself trapped in political debates while the hollow signal grew stronger every day. Captain arrived at the facility 3 weeks after Daniel's awakening. The young human officer had been assigned by Coalition Command to monitor Daniel and report on his activities. Was tall and serious, with brown skin and dark eyes that showed intelligence and determination. He approached his assignment with professional skepticism, expecting to find Daniel either dangerous or delusional. What he found instead changed his life. Daniel began training, and a small group of human volunteers who had come to the facility seeking answers about their forgotten heritage. He taught them combat techniques that had been lost for nearly two, methods developed specifically to fight enemies that moved faster and hit harder than any normal soldier could handle. The training was brutal and exhausting. Some volunteers quit within days. Others pushed through the pain and began to improve. Proved to be an exceptional student. He absorbed Daniel's teachings quickly and showed natural talent for the enhanced combat styles. Daniel recognized something in the young captain that reminded him of the guardians he had fought beside so long ago, had the potential to become something more than an ordinary soldier. Lena visited the training sessions when her duties allowed. She watched Daniel push the volunteers harder than any instructor she had ever seen. Some nights she found him sitting alone in the facility's observation room, staring at the stars with an expression she could not read. One night she finally asked him the question that had been bothering her since his awakening. She asked him what the guardians really were. She asked him to tell her the truth without softening it for her comfort. Daniel was silent for a long time. Then he spoke in a voice that held old pain and older resignation. He told her that the guardians were weapons built from human children. They were selected before birth based on genetic potential and then modified in ways that changed them fundamentally. They were grown in laboratories, trained from the moment they could walk, and told that their only purpose was to fight and die for humanity's survival. Daniel had been taken from his family at age 3. He had no memories of his mother or father, no knowledge of what his life might have been. He knew only the faces of his fellow guardians and the instructors who shaped them into instruments of war. He knew only the sound of battle and the silence that came after. Lena did not know what to say. She had grown up on a peaceful colony world with parents who loved her and a future that seemed full of possibility. She could not imagine being transformed into a weapon before she was old enough to understand what that meant. Daniel told her that he was not seeking sympathy. The Guardians had accepted their purpose because they believed in what they were fighting for. They had given everything to stop the Hollow, and most of them had died in the attempt. Daniel had survived only because someone decided he should sleep while others continued fighting. The Hollow beacon grew stronger over the following weeks. Daniel's calculations suggested that something was moving toward Coalition space, traveling on a path that would bring it close to inhabited systems within months. He reported this to the Council repeatedly, but his warnings continued to be ignored. Then a Coalition scout ship, investigating the signal, went silent. The vessel had been sent to gather data on the anomaly that Daniel claimed was a hollow beacon. It was crewed by 30 and equipped with the best sensors the Coalition possessed. When it failed to report on schedule, a rescue mission was dispatched. They found only wreckage floating in empty space. The ship had been torn apart by forces that the investigators could not explain. The hull showed damage patterns that did not match any known weapon. Whatever had destroyed the vessel had done so quickly and completely. The only thing recovered was the ship's recording device. Most of the data was corrupted, but one image remained intact. It showed something moving through the darkness beyond the ship's sensors, something vast and wrong, larger than any vessel ever constructed by Coalition species. Daniel looked at the image and felt cold recognition wash over him. He had seen shapes like this before, in battles that had cost millions of lives. He had fought against darkness that consumed everything it touched. The Council finally called an emergency session. The image from the destroyed scout ship was displayed for all representatives to see. For the first time, they began to believe that Daniel's warnings might be real. Then a transmission arrived from the direction of the anomaly. It was not in any known language, but Daniel understood it perfectly. The words burned into his mind like fire. "We remember you, Guardian. We have been waiting." Daniel stood in the council chamber and felt the weight of his purpose settle onto his shoulders once more. The enemy had returned. The war was beginning again, and he was the only one who knew how to fight it. The hollow emerged from the void like nightmares given form. 3 vessels appeared at the edge of Coalition space, each one the size of a small moon. They did not respond to communication attempts. They did not slow down or change course. They simply moved forward with terrible purpose, heading toward the nearest inhabited system. The Coalition fleet mobilized for the first time in centuries. Admiral led 200 warships to intercept the enemy, confident that superior numbers would carry the day. They were proud warriors who had never lost a major engagement. They believed that whatever these hollow were, they could be defeated through courage and firepower. They were wrong. The battle lasted less than an hour. Coalition weapons struck the hollow vessels and left barely visible marks on their dark surfaces. The enemy did not fire back with conventional weapons. Instead, they released swarms of smaller craft that moved through space like living things, tearing through Coalition ships with claws and tendrils that ignored shields and armor. Thousands of soldiers died in the first minutes of combat. The fleet that had seemed so powerful was reduced to scattered survivors fleeing in all directions. Admiral's flagship was among the casualties. The commander died fighting on his bridge, refusing to retreat even when his ship was being torn apart around him. His last transmission was a warning to the Coalition that Daniel had been right all along. Daniel watched the battle from the Guardian facility and felt old memories stirring in his mind. He had seen this before. He had fought against this darkness when he was younger and stronger and surrounded by fellow Guardians. Now he was alone, and the enemy was just as terrible as he remembered. He went to the facility's armory for the first time since his awakening. The room was sealed behind doors that opened only to his genetic signature. Inside, he found equipment that had been waiting for him for almost 2,000 years. His armor hung on a stand in the center of the room, black and sleek, and covered with systems that interfaced directly with his enhanced nervous system. His weapons rested beside it, designed to respond to thought alone. Daniel had hoped to never wear this armor again. He had hoped that his war was truly over and that he could find some kind of peace in whatever time he had left. But hope was a luxury that Guardians could not afford. Lena found him in the armory as he prepared for what might be his final battle. She told him that she wanted to come with him on whatever mission he was planning. He refused at first, arguing that she was not trained to fight the Hollow and would only die uselessly. But Lena was stubborn in a way that reminded Daniel of soldiers he had known long ago. She argued that someone needed to witness what happened, to carry the knowledge back to the Coalition if Daniel failed. Captain arrived with his volunteers, the humans that Daniel had been training over the past weeks. They were not Guardians. They were not rebuilt weapons designed from birth for combat. But they had learned quickly, and they refused to stay behind while their teacher went to war. Daniel saw determination in their eyes that made him proud despite his fears for their safety. The mission was simple in concept and suicidal in execution. They would take one of the ancient ships from the facility's hangar and infiltrate the lead Hollow vessel. Daniel believed that destroying the central ship might disrupt the coordination of the enemy fleet. It was a slim chance, but it was the only chance they had. Dr. Ka came to them before they departed with information he had discovered in the facility's deepest archives. The scientist had been studying records that dated back to the original conflict with the Hollow. What he found changed everything Daniel thought he knew about his enemy. The Hollow had not always been destroyers. The ancient records contained fragments of their history from before they became what they were now. They had once been a civilization like any other, curious and creative and alive. Something had changed them. Something had broken them and turned them into the consuming darkness that had nearly destroyed humanity. The records did not specify what that something was, but they made clear that the Hollow were victims as much as they were enemies. Daniel absorbed this information and stored it away for later consideration. There was no time now for philosophical questions about the nature of his enemy. There was only the mission and the small hope that they might survive it. The ancient ship launched from the facility and raced toward the Hollow fleet. Daniel piloted while, and the volunteers prepared for combat in the cargo bay. Lena sat in the co-pilot seat and watched the enemy vessels grow larger in the. She had never seen anything so alien and so wrong. The Hollow ships seemed to pulse with dark life, their surfaces shifting and changing in ways that hurt to look at directly. They approached the lead vessel using stealth systems that Daniel remembered from his training. The hollow did not detect them until they were already inside, slipping through an opening in the dark hull that might have been a wound or might have been a mouth. The interior of the vessel was organic and pulsing, corridors of flesh and bone that twisted in directions that made no logical sense. The fighting began almost immediately. Hollow creatures emerged from the walls and floors, shapes that description, all teeth and claws and hunger. Daniel moved through them like a force of nature, his enhanced body pushing beyond limits that would have killed any normal human. His weapons fired beams of energy that burned through the creatures and left smoking holes in the organic walls. And the volunteers fought beside him, using the techniques Daniel had taught them. They were not as fast or as strong as their teacher, but they held their own against enemies that should have overwhelmed them. 3 of them died in the first corridor. 2 more fell in the second, but the survivors pressed forward with grim determination. Lena stayed close to Daniel, her weapon firing at anything that came near. She was not trained for this kind of combat, but she refused to be useless. She watched Daniel fight and understood for the first time what he truly was. He was not just a soldier. He was a weapon of mass destruction contained in human form. They reached the core of the vessel after what felt like hours of constant fighting. Daniel expected to find some kind of control center or vital organ that he could destroy. What he found instead stopped him in his tracks. The chamber at the heart of the hollow ship contained thousands of pods arranged in neat rows that stretched into the darkness. Inside each pod was a preserved body, frozen in some kind of stasis field. They were not hollow. They were members of countless species, harvested from civilizations that had fallen to the enemy over. Some of them were clearly ancient, their forms unlike anything in Coalition records. Others were more familiar. Some of them were human, and some of those humans wore uniforms that Daniel recognized instantly. They were guardians, his brothers and sisters who had fallen in the final battle almost 2,000 years ago. They had not died. They had been taken. They had been kept here, alive and aware, for reasons that Daniel could not comprehend. One pod began to open as Daniel approached. The woman inside had gray hair and a face marked by time despite the preservation. Her eyes opened and focused on Daniel with recognition that cut through him like a blade. She spoke his name in a voice that had not been used for centuries. She had been his commander. She had been the one who ordered him into sleep when the final battle turned against them. And she had been conscious inside this prison for almost 2,000 years, her mind connected to the hollow hive in ways that had shown her terrible truths. She looked at Daniel with eyes that held both sorrow and hope. She told him that she knew the secret of the hollow, she knew what had broken them, and she knew the only way to truly end this war. Daniel stared at and felt the weight of 2,000 years pressing down on him. She had been his commander, the woman who had shaped him into the soldier he became. She had been the one who ordered him frozen while she and the others continued fighting. He had always believed she died in battle. Instead, she had been captured and kept in this living prison, her mind connected to the hollow consciousness for longer than most civilizations existed. Pulled herself from the pod with effort, her body weak from the long imprisonment. Daniel moved to help her, but she waved him away. She did not have much time, she said. The connection to the hollow hive mind had damaged her in ways that could not be healed, but before she faded, she needed to tell him what she had learned. The hollow were not evil in the way Daniel had always believed. They had been infected by something they discovered in the void between galaxies. A presence, a hunger. It had spread through their civilization like a disease, consuming everything that made them who they were and leaving only the need to feed. The hollow did not choose to destroy. They were compelled to destroy by something that had taken root inside them millions of years ago. Had spent centuries experiencing the hollow consciousness from the inside. She had felt their endless hunger and their endless pain. Beneath the infection, buried so deep that even the hollow themselves had forgotten it existed, was the remnant of what they had once been. They were not monsters. They were prisoners trapped inside their own bodies, forced to watch as they consumed everything they encountered. Daniel listened to this revelation and tried to reconcile it with everything he knew. He had spent his entire life fighting the hollow. He had watched them destroy worlds and consume billions of lives. He had killed more of them than he could count, and now was telling him that they were victims. The chamber shook as the hollow ship detected the intruders at its core. More creatures would be coming soon, drawn by the threat to their vessel. Daniel had to make a decision. He could destroy the core and kill everyone aboard, including the thousands of prisoners and his former brothers and sisters frozen in their pods. This might disrupt the enemy fleet and buy the coalition time to prepare defenses. Or he could try something that his creators had never considered. Lena watched Daniel struggle with this choice. She had come to know him over the past weeks, had seen the pain he carried and the guilt he felt for surviving when so many others had died. She understood that he was not just a weapon. He was a man who had been the chance to be anything else. She asked him what the Guardians had been fighting for all those years ago. Daniel answered that they fought to protect humanity and to preserve the chance for future generations to live in peace. She asked him if fighting was the only way to protect people. He did not have an answer. And the surviving volunteers formed a defensive perimeter around the chamber as hollow creatures began pouring through the corridors. They were buying Daniel time with their lives, holding back an endless tide of darkness so he could make his choice. 2 more volunteers fell in the first wave, then another. Daniel made his decision. He asked if her connection to the hollow hive mind could work both ways. She said that it could, but the experience would be overwhelming. No human mind was designed to handle that kind of contact. It would likely destroy him. Daniel told her to do it anyway. Placed her hands on his temples and opened the connection. Daniel felt the hollow consciousness flood into his mind like an ocean of hunger and pain. He experienced millions of years of consumption, countless civilizations devoured, endless worlds reduced to nothing. The infection screamed at him to join, to surrender, to become part of the feeding. But Daniel was a guardian. He had been built to endure things that would break ordinary minds. He pushed through the hunger and the pain, searching for what had described. He searched for the remnant of what the hollow had once been, buried beneath of infection. He found them. They were small and fatting, fragments of consciousness that had held on despite everything. They remembered what it felt like to think clearly. They remembered what it felt like to create instead of destroy. They remembered what it felt like to be alive. Daniel did not attack them with weapons or violence. Instead, he shared with them the only things he had that were not about war. He showed them his memories of Earth before the conflict, sunlight on green fields, the sound of rain on rooftops, his mother's face, half remembered from those first 3 years before the Guardian program took him. He showed them what it meant to be human, not as a weapon, but as a living being capable of joy and love and hope. The hollow consciousness shuddered. The hunger faltered. For the first time in millions of years, something other than consumption stirred within the darkness. The creatures attacking and the volunteers stopped moving. Throughout the ship and throughout the fleet, the hollow paused in their assault. The infection did not disappear. It was too ancient and too deeply rooted to be removed so easily. But something had changed. A crack had formed in the endless hunger. Daniel spoke to them through the connection. He did not offer forgiveness for what they had done. He did not pretend that the past could be erased. He offered something else. He offered the possibility of change. He told them that humanity had once transformed its children into weapons because there seemed to be no other choice. But there was always another choice. There was always the possibility of healing instead of destruction. The hollow responded. Their communication was not in words but in feelings and intentions. They were tired. They had been hungry for so long that they had forgotten any other way to exist. The infection resisted, but the remnant of their true selves reached toward the offer Daniel was making. The 3 massive vessels turned away from Coalition space and began moving back toward the void from which they had come. They did not promise peace. They did not claim to be healed, but they agreed to stop, at least for now. They agreed to consider the possibility that they did not have to consume everything they encountered. Daniel collapsed as broke the connection. His mind felt shattered by the experience, but he was alive. Lena caught him before he hit the floor and held him while the remaining survivors gathered around. Smiled at her former student with pride in her fatting eyes. She told him that he had done something no guardian had ever accomplished. He had won a battle without killing. Then she closed her eyes and did not open them again. The survivors carried their dead and wounded back to their ship. The hollow did not interfere as they departed. Daniel stood at the viewport and watched the massive vessels recede into the distance, heading toward a future that was uncertain but no longer hopeless. The Coalition Council reacted to the news with confusion and relief. They did not fully understand what Daniel had done or how he had done it. Many species remained fearful of the hollow and demanded that defenses be strengthened against their return. Others began to consider the possibility that some enemies could be negotiated with instead of destroyed. Lena was promoted to lead a new human initiative focused on developing both defenses against the Hollow and methods for communication with them. She recruited scientists from multiple species to study the infection and search for a cure. It was a long-term project with no guarantee of success, but it represented hope. Continued training new recruits using the techniques Daniel had taught him. The young captain had become something more than an ordinary soldier. He carried the legacy of the Guardians forward, not as weapons of destruction, but as protectors who would use violence only when all other options had failed. Daniel worked with Dr. Ka to understand the ancient records and to find any information that might help cure the Hollow infection. He was no longer just a weapon waiting for the next battle. He was something he had never been allowed to be before. He was a person with a purpose beyond war. One evening he stood on a balcony overlooking a coalition city, watching ships come and go against a sky filled with stars. Lena found him there and stood beside him in comfortable silence. She asked him if he truly believed the Hollow could be saved. He admitted that he did not know. The infection was ancient and powerful, and the road to healing would be long and uncertain. But for the first time in his existence, he had something he had never possessed as a guardian. He had hope. The stars burned on above them, indifferent to the small creatures who had decided to try something other than destruction. The war was not over. The future remained uncertain. But in the space between fear and despair, something new had taken root. And sometimes that was enough.